Hi, I'm Monica. Nice to meet you. Before I tell you my story, kindly hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I like to know where you're from. Now let's dive in. I'd been staring at the road for over an hour, my fingers drumming the steering wheel as the November wind rattled through the cracked window of my old Toyota. The long driveway to our home was lined with leafless maples, their branches reaching overhead like gnarled fingers. The sky was a heavy gray, promising snow. It was Thanksgiving week, and I'd been expecting, well, something warmer. I'd called Johnny twice that morning. No answer. Not unusual. My husband had the patience of a fire alarm when it came to picking up the phone. Still, I thought he'd at least be home. We'd been married 6 years. We always spent Thanksgiving together. But the house looked abandoned. The curtains in the front window hung half-closed, and the porch light, which Johnny swore he'd fix before it burned out completely, was already dead. My gut twisted as I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching on the gravel. Inside, the air was cold enough to make my breath visible. No turkey thawing in the fridge. No wood in the fireplace. Just a silence so deep I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. And then I found the note. It was on the kitchen counter, under a bottle of half-empty bourbon. The handwriting was Johnny's, though sloppier than usual. Monica, gone for a while. Don't wait up. House is fine. Anthony's upstairs if you need anything. That was it. No explanation. No happy Thanksgiving. No I love you. I felt a prickling along my spine. Anthony? Anthony was Johnny's stepfather. A quiet, stooped man in his late 70s with thinning white hair and a smoker's cough. He lived upstairs in what used to be Johnny's childhood bedroom. Johnny rarely mentioned him, except to complain about having to take care of the old man, which was a joke, because Johnny never actually did. I climbed the stairs, each creak echoing in the stillness. The smell of antiseptic and stale air grew stronger. When I knocked, the door swung open without resistance. Anthony was sitting in bed, a plaid blanket over his legs, his skin pale and thin as paper. His eyes lit up when he saw me, though they looked tired. So tired. Monica, he said, his voice raspy. I didn't think I'd see you. I didn't think I'd see you either, I replied, trying to sound cheerful. Johnny's not here? Anthony gave a bitter little laugh. No. He and your mother-in-law took a cruise. Warm beaches, I suppose. And I imagine he didn't tell you about the other woman. The words hit me like ice water. My heart slammed against my ribs. The what? Don't act surprised, Anthony said softly. You're too smart for that. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The truth was, I'd suspected. Late nights at work. New cologne. His phone glued to his hand. But hearing it confirmed and knowing he'd chosen a holiday to vanish with her, it was something else entirely. Anthony sighed and glanced toward the window. They left me with a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and not much else. Didn't think I'd mind. Didn't think anyone would care. His voice cracked on that last word, and something in me shifted. We were both left behind. Both disposable in their eyes. I stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains wide. Then I guess we'll keep each other company. For the rest of the afternoon, I made tea, found some canned soup in the pantry, and we talked, really talked, for the first time. He told me about his years working construction, about the lung disease he'd been diagnosed with last spring, about the savings he'd built over a lifetime that somehow seemed to have disappeared under Johnny's watch. By nightfall, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was awake. This wasn't an accident. Johnny and his mother had been bleeding him dry, and they left both of us here to fade into the background. Anthony reached over, took my hand, and said quietly, Monica, I don't have long, but I have enough time to make sure they don't get away with it. The way he said it made my pulse quicken. The seed of something dangerous, maybe even liberating, had just been planted. I squeezed his hand back. Then let's make sure they don't. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Anthony's cough rattling down the hallway. It was the kind of cough that made you wince. Deep, wet, and too stubborn to stop. I padded into the kitchen, still in my sweatshirt from the night before, and found him sitting at the table, a mug of black coffee between his trembling hands. You didn't have to get up so early, I said, grabbing 2 slices of bread for the toaster. Couldn't sleep, he replied. Too much on my mind. I knew what he meant. It was the same for me. The image of Johnny laughing on some cruise ship with his mistress burned in my head like a bad dream I couldn't wake from. But it wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the sheer audacity, leaving his sick stepfather and his wife here, like we were old furniture he could shove into the attic. We ate in near silence, but not the kind that feels awkward, more like the kind where words are being chosen carefully. After breakfast, Anthony motioned for me to follow him to his room. His steps were slow, deliberate. Once we were inside, he closed the door and lowered his voice. "I'm going to tell you something, Monica," he began. "But it doesn't leave this room." "All right." He reached for the drawer in his bedside table and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was worn at the edges, like it had been handled too many times. Inside were bank statements, letters, and photocopies of checks. "They've been taking from me for years," he said. "Started small, helping me manage bills after my wife passed. Then it was transfers for investments. And lately, they've been draining what's left." I scanned the pages, my stomach knotting tighter with every line. Johnny's name was on half the withdrawals, his mother's on the rest. The sums were staggering, tens of thousands gone. Anthony's voice grew steadier as he spoke, like the act of telling me was lifting some weight. "I went to a lawyer months ago. We drafted a will that leaves everything to Johnny, because I didn't have anyone else I could trust. But now, I'd rather see my life's work go to the birds than to them." I looked up at him. "So change it. Make a new one." A flicker of a smile crossed his face. "That's exactly what I intend to do. But I need a witness I trust. And someone who can help me put the rest of the story together, so when they come back, the truth hits them harder than any lawyer ever could." The weight of his words settled over me. He wasn't talking about revenge for its own sake. This was about dignity. About leaving this world without letting two selfish people write the ending for him. For the next few hours, we began quietly mapping things out. Anthony told me dates, amounts, details of conversations. I wrote everything down in a spiral notebook I found in the junk drawer. We searched through boxes in the attic for old receipts, deeds, and photos that could prove how long and how hard he'd worked for what they were now stealing. At one point, Anthony stopped and pressed a hand to his chest, catching his breath. "Don't look at me like that," he said with a chuckle. "I'm not done yet." By evening, the house felt less like a place I'd been abandoned in and more like a headquarters, small, quiet, but humming with purpose. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, dusting the driveway in white. Anthony sat back in his chair, watching the flakes drift past the window. "You know, Monica," he said softly, "I thought I'd be spending these last months alone. But maybe this is exactly how it was meant to be." I nodded, closing the notebook and sliding it across the table toward him. "They think they left us with nothing. They have no idea what we've got now." And for the first time in days, I actually smiled. Because in the silence of that cold November night, our plan was no longer just an idea. It was in motion. By Friday morning, the snow had piled knee-deep along the driveway, making the world outside look like it had been scrubbed clean. But inside the house, the air was sharper, charged with a sense of urgency. Anthony sat at the kitchen table with the manila envelope spread open, and my spiral notebook lying beside it. We weren't just gathering scraps anymore. We were building a case. The first step was the will. "I already called my lawyer," Anthony said, pushing a mug of tea toward me. "She's agreed to meet me Monday morning. Said she can draw up a new will that same day." "And she knows what's going on?" I asked. "She knows enough. The rest we'll put in front of her with proof." We spent most of the morning sorting papers into labeled stacks. Bank statements, legal documents, medical records, miscellaneous, my handwriting scrawled across the tabs in black Sharpie. Every so often, Anthony would pause to add a sticky note with a detail only he could remember, a date, a name, a conversation overheard. Around noon, I drove into town to pick up groceries. I felt strangely alert, like I was moving through enemy territory. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected Johnny's name to flash across the screen. But there was nothing. No call, no text. It was as if he'd dropped off the map, except for the picture Anthony had painted of him sipping cocktails somewhere sunny. When I got back, Anthony was sitting by the window with a small metal lockbox in his lap. Found this in the back of my closet, he said. It's got some interesting things in it. Inside were old photographs, a stack of unopened letters, and a worn leather ledger that looked like it had been kept for decades. Anthony flipped it open to a page dated nearly 30 years ago. This is every payment I made on the house, every repair, every bit of sweat I put into keeping it standing. I want them to see exactly what they've been trying to strip from me. That night, after dinner, we went through the ledger together. Each entry was meticulous. Roof repairs, water heater replacements, mortgage payments down to the last cent. It was a record not just of money spent, but of a life built with care. You've been keeping this for 30 years? I asked. Anthony smiled faintly. I've always believed that if someone ever tried to take something from me, I'd have the receipts. Sunday came, and the plan widened. Anthony suggested we make digital copies of everything, insurance, he called it. I scanned every page, organizing files on a flash drive we could hand directly to his lawyer. I made a second copy for myself, tucking it deep into my bag. By the time Monday arrived, the house no longer felt abandoned. It felt like the command center of a campaign. We drove to the lawyer's office in Anthony's old Buick, the heater wheezing against the cold. Inside, his lawyer, a brisk, silver-haired woman named Elaine, greeted us like old friends. She listened as Anthony explained his decision, her pen moving steadily across a yellow legal pad. So, to be clear, she said, looking over her glasses, you want to leave the house, the savings account, and all remaining assets to Monica? Yes, Anthony said firmly. She's the only one who's been here. The only one who cares. I blinked, stunned. We'd never talked about my name being on the will. But Anthony's gaze didn't waver, and something inside me shifted, a mix of gratitude and the heavy weight of responsibility. Elaine made copies of everything we'd brought, sliding them into a thick folder. Once this is signed and notarized, it's done, she said. If they contest it, they'll have to do so with the evidence staring them in the face. When we left the office, Anthony leaned on my arm as we stepped into the brittle winter sunlight. One piece at a time, Monica, he murmured. That's how you win. And as the Buick rumbled back toward the house, I realized we were no longer just defending ourselves. We were laying the groundwork for a reckoning, one that was going to hit Johnny and his mother harder than they could possibly imagine. The week after we left Elaine's office passed in slow, deliberate steps. The snow kept falling, and the roads turned slick and treacherous, but inside the house, everything was in order. The will was finalized. The documents were copied twice over. Anthony's ledger sat in a neat pile, ready to speak for itself. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a frozen lake, knowing the ice could crack at any second. Anthony was getting weaker. He still managed to make breakfast most mornings, but his cough came in harsher waves now, sometimes leaving him doubled over, gripping the counter for balance. I caught myself hovering near him more than once, afraid he might fall. You're looking at me like I'm already gone, he said one afternoon as I brought him tea. I'm looking at you like you're carrying too much, I replied. He gave me a tired smile. Maybe. But I'd rather carry it myself than leave it in their hands. There hung heavy in the air. Johnny and his mother were due back in less than a week. I'd checked the cruise itinerary online. Their ship was scheduled to dock Friday morning, which meant by Friday night, they could be standing in this kitchen, smug and sunburned, expecting everything to be exactly as they'd left it. We both knew it wouldn't be. That Tuesday, Anthony asked me to help him record a video. It's not for the news, he said, settling into the armchair by the window. It's just for them. I want it to be the last thing they can't argue with. I set up my phone on a stack of books. He looked straight into the camera, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He talked about the years of work he'd poured into the house, about the trust he'd placed in Johnny and his mother, about the betrayal of watching his savings disappear while they treated him like a burden. Then he said, "This is my choice, my will, my last say in the matter. And if you're watching this, it's because you can't take it back." I ended the recording and transferred it to the flash drive. Anthony exhaled like he'd just set down something unbearably heavy. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind batter the windows. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner I'd imagined having here, the way it was supposed to be. I thought about Johnny's hand resting casually on my knee in public while he whispered lies under his breath. And I thought about Anthony alone in this house before I got here, convinced no one would stand up for him. On Thursday, Anthony handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. "Open it when the time comes," he said. I didn't ask what was inside. By Friday morning, the snow had stopped. The driveway lay untouched, a smooth white sheet waiting for tire tracks. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and listened to the stillness. "They'll be here soon," Anthony said from the doorway. He was dressed neatly, in a pressed shirt and sweater, as if expecting company. I nodded. "And we're ready." He smiled faintly. "Oh, they're the ones who aren't." I didn't know it then, but by the time the sun set that day, nothing in this family would look the same again. I spotted them through the kitchen window before I heard the crunch of tires on snow. Johnny's SUV turned into the driveway, sunlight bouncing off the windshield. The passenger door opened, and his mother stepped out first, bundled in a fur-trimmed coat, her hair perfectly set, a rolling suitcase trailing behind her. Johnny followed, tanned and grinning, a man with no idea his life was about to turn upside down. Anthony was in his chair by the window, watching like it was a show he'd been waiting all season to see. He had insisted on staying in the living room. "Front row seat," he'd said. The front door swung open without a knock. "Monica." Johnny's voice was all fake warmth, as if the last 2 weeks hadn't happened. "We're back." I stepped into the hallway, my arms folded. I noticed. His grin faltered. "Where's the turkey? Don't tell me you didn't do Thanksgiving without us." "You weren't here," I said simply. And neither was Anthony's dinner. His mother's sharp gaze swept over me. "We left more than enough food for him." "Don't be dramatic." Anthony's laugh cut through the air, dry and brittle. "You left me peanut butter and a loaf of bread. And you left Monica to find out about your cruise from me." "Not from you." Johnny turned toward him, irritation flickering across his face. "We didn't think you'd mind." Anthony lifted a hand, stopping him. "You didn't think at all. And that's the problem." I walked over to the coffee table and set down the manila envelope. "This," I said, "is the proof. Every withdrawal, every investment you made with Anthony's money, every bit of what you two have been doing for years." Johnny's mother gave a tight laugh. "You don't have anything that will hold up." Anthony's voice was calm but final. "That's where you're wrong." I handed Johnny the flash drive. "There's a video on there. You might want to watch it before you say another word." They didn't watch it, not yet. Instead, Johnny turned to me, his face darkening. "What are you trying to do here?" "I'm not trying," I said. "It's already done. The will's been changed. The house, the savings, it's not yours anymore." His mother's mouth opened, but Anthony cut her off. "I wanted you to see my face when you realized you'd lost. I wanted you to know that even after everything, I still had the power to choose who gets the last word. And it's not you." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Anthony leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing briefly, like the fight had been lifted from his shoulders. When he opened them again, he looked at me. "Monica," he said softly. "Thank you." That night, Anthony passed quietly in his sleep. I found the sealed envelope on my nightstand the next morning. Inside was a short letter in his shaky handwriting. "You didn't just help me keep what was mine. You gave me back my dignity. Make the most of what comes next." Johnny and his mother contested the will, of course. Elaine handled them with precision, each document, ledger, and recording cutting off their arguments before they could take root. In the end, they walked away with nothing but the knowledge of what they'd tried to do, and failed. The house is quiet again now, but it's a different kind of quiet. Not the emptiness I felt that first day, standing in the cold kitchen with Johnny's note in my hand. This quiet feels like peace, like a promise kept. And sometimes when the snow falls just right outside the window, I swear I can hear Anthony's laugh in the room, warm and certain. If you enjoyed my story, don't forget to like and hit subscribe. You will also enjoy other stories on AJ Family Drama. Until next time, bye.